Hi, my name is Jacob Luigi, and this is my presentation on leadership for the Leadership and Management class at Colorado Christian University. For this presentation, I interviewed David Owens, who is the elder minister at the Wetzel Road Church of Christ. I've known David for almost my entire life. He served the church at Wetzel Road for over 30 years, and I've personally known him and studied underneath him since 2002 when I joined the congregation. This presentation is going to talk about three aspects: motivation, leadership, and followership, and how they pertain to leadership and what leadership's expectations are. So we'll start with this idea of motivation. In the book, in our textbook, DeBruyn says that a broad purpose of leaders is applying motivation and coaching techniques is to get employees involved in their work and excited about working for the organization. So before I go into motivation, value, and psychological safety, I kind of want to share my personal feelings on the idea of motivation. As my role in my company is to increase engagement among the workforce. And so I kind of agree with the statement that I put down here at the bottom of the slide. Motivation is an internal force. It stems from personal responsibility and the individual's belief they can control their own destiny. Your motivation cannot be transferred to them. I believe everybody is self-motivated, so I don't believe you can provide motivation for somebody, and you certainly can't take the factors that motivate you and put them into somebody else and expect the same results. What you can do as a leader is you can work to understand what motivates somebody and provide the right type of inspiration to get the most out of that motivation. And when I talked to David, he agreed with me in these thoughts. He says that motivation is personal, and that to engage a person's motivating factors, they have to be connected to the initiative, right? Uh, to me, this is kind of what I think I read into when it talks about the expectancy theory, right? It says that the amount of effort people expend depends on how much reward they can expect, right? So the amount of inspiration I can put into their motivational factors is the return I'll get. Uh, and then most of the time that isn't money. Most of the time it's appreciation and it's thank you. So when I asked David what he does to add value to a person or a church member who is underneath him, he says first he is constantly showing that he's aware of their presence, that he appreciates their participation, right, and goes above and beyond in making sure that when somebody helps out who doesn't normally help out, or when they go above and beyond, he makes sure that they understand that the initiative or the objective was enhanced because that person engaged in the process, right? And so motivation, a person brings their own motivation, and a good leader learns and tries to develop an understanding of what those motivational factors are. Then a good leader will take inspiration and add value to that person, building on those factors that motivate that individual. And the final aspect of maintaining a motivated follower, employee, churchgoer is the idea of promoting a psychological safety area in which not everybody who follows you is always going to agree with you, or is always going to do things the right way, or is even going to always like you. But they always need to feel safe when they're in your presence, when they're in the presence of a leader. Um, and so when I talked to Davis, how do you go about creating this safe space for someone to come and talk to you about a concern or a struggle or a mistake? What do you do? And he says, well, first of all, it starts with creating personal rapport, having a personal relationship before the conflict arises, before a task is even started. I want to get to know the person and let the person know that I value them and I appreciate them and I care for them as a person first. Then we can engage in a process. And then if they bring a conflict or they bring a concern to me, whether what he said, what David says is whether he agrees with it or not, or whether he understands it, he takes it seriously, right? This is how they are feeling. This is what they're experiencing, and you can't discredit that. You have to make sure that they feel validated, that you're listening to them. And he says he tries to make it the best experience possible. At the end of the conversation, even if it doesn't go their way, you want them to feel like they were valued in the conversation. You don't want them going out feeling like they've been defeated or beaten up for having a difference of opinion or for making a mistake. You want them to walk out of there feeling like they learned something, they gained something from the conversation, they gained insight, and they were heard and appreciated and valued for their difference of opinion. That will keep them coming back to you with more and more concerns and keep them engaged in the process as long as they feel like their leader has genuine concern for them. And so those are really the three things that are centered around an idea of having a motivated follower, right? Is understanding what motivates them, making sure that I'm using inspiration to add value to those motivational factors, and then I'm ultimately protecting their psychological safety and making sure that I create a place where they feel comfortable working, interacting, and participating in. So then we changed our conversation to this idea of leadership. And we talked about what it takes to be a good leader, who he's had in his life that he's recognized as a good leader, times where he's messed up as a leader, and uh, times where he's seen others in his life who have not been good leaders. But where we really had a big part of our conversation was this idea of leading through change, or recognizing when it's time for the church to change or go into the new direction, and how he strategizes for it. And the reason why this was such a big part of the conversation was because this is actually what I teach at my company. I teach a course called Welcoming Change. And so some of this slide is going to be borrowed directly from what I teach there because what David said in his interview with me lined up with what I teach. And so I just thought this be a little bit easier for me to share with you guys. So, a good leader, a minister, an elder of a church, a GM, or HR manager of an organization, right? They start off having awareness of the current state of their church, of their organization at all times. Uh, the current state is how things are functioning, and it is usually how a group of people define themselves. So when they talk about who they are as a church, they're not talking about who they want to be. They're talking about who they are. When you talk about who you are, what type of company you work for, you're talking about what you actually do. You're not talking about future visions or anything. This is where people are comfortable because it's a known state. Doesn't mean that they like it. Doesn't mean that they agree with it. In fact, usually a lot of times people complain about being in the current state because it's convenient to complain about it. It's easy to complain about it. But the idea of changing to something different is scary, and so they will resist that and would rather stay in the current state. But a good leader understands the current state and recognizes when it's getting stale, or when it's time for a change, or when it's out of alignment with the vision or with scripture and it has to change. A good leader is paying attention to what the current state is and when it's time to make a move. And when it's time to make a move, we enter into what is called the transitional state. This can be a very nebulous stage. It's not permanent, therefore it's very hard to define. This is where people struggle with emotions as they're looking for some sort of consistency and definition, but this doesn't have that. Many people find the stage to be the most challenging because from both aspects, from being a leader and a follower, because usually only the leaders understand the full aspect of what the future state looks like, and most of the followers were happy staying in the current state. And it's up to the leaders to slowly build buy-in and work with those underneath them to get them to understand where they're trying to get to. That's making a clear vision statement, that's making clear objectives along the way, because usually this transition doesn't happen current state, future state, all in one step. It happens over phases. And each phase, you bring more and more people along with you. Uh, but if there's poor communication, people can feel like they're left in the dark, and they're left confused, and they're left scared of where they're going because they don't know what the future holds for them. So this is a phase that you shouldn't rush through. You should take your time. Make sure you get as many people to understand the process as possible. So that way, when you get to the future state, you have the majority of the people on board and ready to function in that future state. And of course, the final stage is the future state, right? This is where you were trying to get to, and this is what we will hope will become the new current state. And the truth is, once you develop a new current state, you now need to restart uh, determining whether or not you need to move on to a new future state. And it certainly, as Christians, I think that God asks us to continually improve ourselves, right? So God will challenge us if we rise up and we accept the challenge and we meet the challenge and we get comfortable there. Chances are God's going to ask us to move forward. A good preacher, a good elder, good church leader will continue to ask you to push the envelope with what you're comfortable and what you're capable of doing. Same with a good leader of any organization. And finally, we talked about this idea of followership, and Jesus makes the famous statement to get his first disciples: "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Right? A good leader is always seeking followers, disciples, but he does that by making, or he or she does that by making promises of what they can expect if they do come along and follow. Jesus makes that clear: "I will make you fishers of men." He creates the invite, follows it with a promise. A good leader will say, "Follow me, and this is where I will take you." Right? And it's easy to have a follower when everybody agrees with you and everybody is in favor of you. And so we talked about, with David, we talked about what it takes to be a good follower and what it means to have a good team. But the portion that stood out to me was when we talked about how to deal with conflict. When a follower is out of line or disagrees with the direction. When I asked David how he handles that within the church, he says you have to bring it out. And you have to bring it out as soon as possible, and you have to treat it seriously. I used this quote in one of my papers last week, and it's from Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fall. And he says that conflict is like a stage disease, harder to detect, but easier to handle early. Easier to detect, but harder to handle later, right? One of the worst things a leader can do is recognize that there is conflict and ignore it, hope it goes away. Not only does this not heal the follower, it reduces the leader's effectiveness, right? As doubt takes over in the follower's mind of whether or not the leader is truly capable of leading or not. So really the key takeaway was, as a good leader, you recognize conflict and you seek resolution. And you don't do it through tearing down of the follower. You do it by coming alongside and working for a resolution together. And so, in summary of what I've learned about leadership through this interview, through this course, is summed up in DeBrin's statement here. Leadership is the ability to inspire confidence in and support among the people who are needed to achieve organizational goals, right? A good leader takes the time to learn what motivates those that follow them and then works to provide the right type of inspiration. A good leader is patient with those who follows and ensures that they are effectively walking their followers toward achieving the overall vision. And a good leader effectively handles conflict, not by tearing down his followers, but by coming alongside their subordinate and working through the conflict together. So that was my presentation on leadership. Here are my references. You can't motivate anyone. www.sandler.com. Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fail. Dr. DeWall's, What Makes a High Performance Organization, and DeBrin's Leadership. Thank you for your time. I appreciated what I've learned in this class. Talk to you later.